If you're taking the LSAT in November or beyond, you're going to want to change up your prep. Recent test takers have indicated that LSAT is increasing the proportion of questions involving formal logic on the test. Today, I'll walk you through the recent changes and what they mean for your prep if you're taking the test in November or beyond. For those who don't know me, my name is Steve Schwartz. I've been teaching the LSAT since 2005, and I personally increased my LSAT score from a 152 to a 175. Now, over the past year, we've been seeing more and more reports from test takers indicating that LSAT is putting more questions involving formal logic, numbers and percentages, and conditional reasoning on the test. Some of these questions are on the actual scored sections of the exam, and there are many more on the unscored extra experimental sections, indicating that LSAT is going to increase the proportion of these questions on the scored portions of the test going forward. Now, these are not some radical new question type. They're nothing especially crazy. However, they are difficult, and there are more of these questions than they were on the test in the past. A lot of these questions are logic games like lots of concrete diagrammable statements that are more complex than the average question, meaning that diagramming will oftentimes be helpful to help you solve these questions, even though diagramming is not always necessary. The benefit of diagramming, of course, is that it makes the answer appear more objective and clear-cut, and you won't necessarily have to engage with the content of the question as much as you would otherwise have to on an informal logic question, for example. Now, where does formal logic come up? It will most often show up in inference questions, including must be true, most strongly supported, cannot be true, and must be false questions. It can also show up in sufficient assumption questions and in parallel reasoning questions as well. Now, because there are a variety of question stem types where these concepts and styles of questions will come up, but not all of these questions will be of these types, I'm going to give you a handful of examples that you might want to practice before the big day, whether you're taking the LSAT in November or beyond. So my first example here is an inference question from Prep Test 111. It's a question on inspired musical performances, lots of conditional statements here. Diagramming is incredibly helpful to make the answer more obvious and clear-cut and even predictable. The next question is a flaw question testing your understanding of the difference between numbers and percentages. It's a question from Prep Test 117 about Clara Schumann. The next example here is a parallel reasoning question from Prep Test 124 about April rainfall. Diagramming here is incredibly useful to make the answer more obvious, to help you spot it in the answer choices. And my final example here is a sufficient assumption question from Prep Test 130 involving handmade wigs. So the fact that I can reference these four examples from a wide range of practice tests just tells you that these new questions on the LSAT going forward are nothing radically different. They're nothing incredibly new. But whereas in the past, there were only a small number of them, there will likely be many more of them on the test going forward. Now, you may be wondering, why is LSAT including these questions on the test more than they have in the past? My prediction here, and this is more just speculation than anything else, LSAT has made no formal acknowledgement of the change. My guess would be that because LSAT can no longer test these questions in the logic game section, because there no longer is a logic game section, they've now chosen to test these concepts more and more in the logical reasoning section instead. Now, due to a joint settlement agreement with the plaintiffs who sued LSAC, leading to the removal of the logic game section, LSAC only agreed to remove the logic game section. They never agreed that they wouldn't make minor, subtle, evolutionary changes to the logical reasoning section. They never said they wouldn't do that. And of course, they are free to do that. The test has always evolved over time. And so this is the continuing evolution of the exam. Now, the good news is that because these types of questions have showed up in the past, studying your old practice tests is and will continue to be useful. This is not a formal change to the test like the removal of logic games was, but you may want to devote a bit more attention to these specific types of logical reasoning questions than you otherwise would have. Of course, at LSAT Unplugged, we've already updated all of our materials for the new LSAT format. No more logic games, a whole lot more logical reasoning, and we have plenty of lessons on these formal logic questions and the numbers and percentages questions as well. You can always cover them in your one-on-one coaching sessions or the small group coaching sessions that we offer. If you're interested in finding out more, you can check out the links below this video to book a call with me and my team. We'd be glad to help you out. Now, I want to particularly call your attention to the inference category of questions here. I mentioned earlier inference questions, sufficient assumption questions, and parallel questions. Inference questions are one of the most common types of logical reasoning questions on the exam, along with flaw questions and necessary assumption questions. And so the fact that I referenced parallel questions earlier, that doesn't mean that you should devote a ton of time to them, because there are only a couple of them per exam, whereas there are many more inference questions, for example. So you may want to devote a bit more time to inference in particular than you would have otherwise. Anyway, folks, that's all for now. And in the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.